In 1533, a red-haired baby girl was born who would transform a small, religiously divided island kingdom into the greatest power on earth. By the time she died 70 years later, England had defeated the mighty Spanish Armada. Shakespeare was writing his greatest plays, and English ships were exploring every ocean. This was Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, whose 45-year reign would become synonymous with England's golden age. Elizabeth's story is one of survival against impossible odds. Declared illegitimate at age 2 when her mother was beheaded, she grew up knowing that her very existence was politically dangerous. Yet through intelligence, courage, and sheer force of will, she not only survived but thrived, becoming one of history's greatest monarchs. Her England was a world of incredible contrasts, glittering court pageantry alongside grinding poverty, religious persecution balanced with cultural flowering, and traditional medieval structures giving way to early modern innovation. The Elizabethan era encompassed the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the flourishing of English drama and poetry, the beginnings of England's colonial empire, and the transformation of a kingdom into a nation. It was an age when the printing press was spreading literacy, when explorers were mapping new worlds, and when a woman's refusal to marry became an act of revolutionary political genius. This is the story of how a bastardized princess became Gloriana, how England found its voice, and how one woman's choices shaped the destiny of nations. So let's start today's story. Find somewhere comfortable, lie down, and listen to the remarkable tale of Elizabeth Tudor and the golden age that bears her name. Your eyes flutter open to the sound of servants moving quietly through the corridors of Greenwich Palace. The heavy tapestries rustle in the December cold, and somewhere in the distance you can hear the Thames lapping against the palace walls. It's 1533, and you are Princess Elizabeth Tudor, though the word princess will soon lose all meaning for you. Your nursery is grand by any standard, painted ceilings depicting biblical scenes, carved oak furniture that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, and windows that look out over the royal gardens. But there's tension in the air that even a baby can sense. Your mother, Anne Boleyn, sweeps into the room wearing cloth of gold, her dark eyes flashing with an intensity that makes servants step back. She's fighting for her life, though you won't understand this for years to come. King Henry VIII, your father, had moved heaven and earth to marry your mother. He'd broken with Rome, defied the Pope, and torn his kingdom apart, all for the promise of a male heir. When you arrived in September 1533, a healthy, red-haired baby girl, the celebrations were muted. England needed a prince, not another princess. Your early months pass in luxury, but growing unease. Your father visits occasionally, his massive presence filling the nursery as he peers down at you with those small, calculating eyes. She has the Tudor look, he says to your mother, noting the red gold hair you've inherited from him. But you can sense his disappointment even then, the way his attention quickly shifts elsewhere, the way conversations stop when he enters the room. The palace is a maze of whispers and half-heard conversations. Courtiers speak in lowered voices about your father's wandering eye, about your mother's increasingly desperate attempts to produce a son. Your governess, Lady Bryan, tries to maintain normalcy, but even she seems nervous, jumping at unexpected sounds, always glancing toward the door as if expecting bad news. By your second birthday, the atmosphere has grown poisonous. Your mother is pregnant again, desperately hoping for a son, but this pregnancy ends in miscarriage, possibly of a male child. Your father's patience, never abundant, has worn thin. He's already noticed Jane Seymour, one of your mother's ladies in waiting, with her pale prettiness and submissive manner so different from your mother's fiery temperament. Then comes that terrible day in May 1536. You're too young to understand what's happening, but you sense the change immediately. Your mother doesn't come to visit. The usual sounds of court life, the music, the laughter, the constant bustle, die away to whispers. Lady Bryan appears at your nursery door, her face grave, and behind her stand men you've never seen before, lawyers and clerks with grim expressions. "Your Majesty," one of them says to Lady Bryan, then corrects himself hastily. "My lady, the princess. That is, the Lady Elizabeth." He can't seem to find the right words. How do you tell a 2-year-old that her mother has been beheaded for treason, adultery, and incest? How do you explain that her parents' marriage has been declared invalid, that she is no longer a princess, but a bastard with no legal claim to anything? Your world shrinks overnight. The grand apartments are taken away, replaced with smaller, shabbier rooms. The dozens of servants dwindle to a handful. Your clothes, once the finest silk and velvet, become increasingly threadbare as no money arrives for new ones. Lady Bryan writes desperate letters to the Royal Council, begging for funds to buy you proper clothing. The Lady Elizabeth has neither gown, nor kirtle, nor petticoat, she writes. A princess has become a charity case in her own palace. But perhaps most devastating of all, your father stops visiting entirely. The man whose approval once seemed so important, whose attention you craved even as an infant, has written you out of his life as completely as if you had never existed. You are Henry's daughter no longer, at least not in any way that matters in the dangerous world of Tudor politics. Your new home is Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, a sprawling red brick manor house surrounded by gardens and parkland. It's beautiful in its way, but it's not a palace, and everyone knows it. This is where unwanted royal children are sent, out of sight, out of mind, but not quite forgotten. Lady Bryan has been replaced by Cat Ashley as your governess, a warm, intelligent woman who becomes the closest thing to a mother you'll ever know. Cat sees something special in you, a quick intelligence, a steely determination that reminds her of your father at his best, and a wariness that no child your age should possess. She begins your education early, recognizing that knowledge will be your greatest weapon in a world where royal bastards rarely survive to adulthood. Your lessons begin before dawn each day. By age 4, you're learning to read English and beginning Latin. By 6, you're reading classical authors in their original languages and corresponding in Italian with learned men across Europe. Your tutors, William Grindal and later Roger Ascham, are amazed by your intellectual appetite. You devour books on history, theology, philosophy, and languages with a hunger that seems almost desperate. Knowledge is power, Cat tells you one morning, as you struggle with a particularly difficult passage of Cicero, and power is the only thing that will keep you safe. She doesn't need to explain further. You've already learned that lesson from watching what happened to your mother. The household at Hatfield exists in a strange limbo. You're not quite royal, but you're not quite ordinary either. Foreign ambassadors occasionally visit, trying to gauge whether you might someday be useful in marriage negotiations. English nobles send their children to be educated alongside you, hedging their bets in case your fortunes change. You learn to read these subtle signs of political calculation, to understand that every friendship might be temporary, every alliance conditional. Your half-sister Mary visits occasionally, and these encounters are complex and painful. Mary is 17 years older than you, a devout Catholic who sees you as a living reminder of the religious revolution that destroyed her mother's marriage. Yet she's also surprisingly kind, bringing you gifts and showing genuine affection. When she smiles at you, You can see traces of the girl she once was before her father's great matter tore her world apart. You have his look, Mary says one afternoon, studying your face as you sit together in the garden. She means your father, of course. The red hair, the pale skin, the sharp intelligence in your eyes. But you have something else too, something that might serve you better. She doesn't elaborate, but you sense she means the wariness you've learned, the ability to survive that your mother somehow lacked. Your brother Edward is born in 1537 to your father's third wife, Jane Seymour. Suddenly, unexpectedly, your fortunes begin to change. Henry VIII, perhaps feeling secure now that he has a male heir, perhaps experiencing some paternal affection for his clever daughter, or perhaps simply wanting to put the unpleasantness of Anne Boleyn behind him, restores both you and Mary to the succession. You're still technically illegitimate, that requires an Act of Parliament to change, but you're once again in line for the throne, after Edward and Mary. The change is immediate and dramatic. Better apartments, finer clothes, more servants, and most importantly, recognition. You're once again Princess Elizabeth in formal documents. Foreign ambassadors begin to pay attention, and you start to receive marriage proposals from various European princes. At age 10, you're already being treated as a political asset. But with recognition comes danger. You're now important enough to be worth killing, worth using as a pawn in someone else's political games. You learn to be careful about what you say and to whom. Your education expands to include not just classical learning, but practical statecraft, how to read people, how to detect lies, how to give answers that commit you to nothing while seeming to promise everything. Your father visits Hatfield occasionally now, and these encounters are terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Henry VIII, in his later years, is a mountain of a man, diseased and often in pain, but still radiating the authority that has held England in his grip for decades. He seems genuinely pleased with your progress, testing your Latin and Greek, discussing theology with an intelligence that reminds you that this man, whatever his faults, is no fool. You have a good mind, he tells you one afternoon, and you treasure these words like precious jewels. Use it wisely. It's perhaps the closest thing to fatherly advice you'll ever receive from him. When Henry VIII dies in January 1547, you're 13 years old and already more educated than most university graduates. You've learned Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and Spanish. You can discuss theology with bishops and philosophy with scholars. But more importantly, you've learned the hardest lesson of all, how to survive in a world where royal blood can be either a blessing or a death sentence, depending on the political weather. Your 9-year-old half-brother Edward becomes King Edward VI, but of course he can't really rule. Power falls to a regency council dominated by Protestant reformers, led first by his uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, and later by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. The England you knew under your father, cautiously, moderately Protestant, lurches toward radical religious reform. You watch from Hatfield as centuries-old traditions are swept away. Priests are forced to marry, Latin masses are banned, and beautiful church decorations are destroyed as popish idolatry. It's exciting and terrifying. The world is changing faster than anyone can keep up with, and you're never quite sure if you're moving in the right direction. Your own religious education becomes a political minefield. You're raised Protestant, as your father intended, but you're also aware that half the country still yearns for the old Catholic ways. You learn to express your Protestant beliefs with conviction while avoiding the kind of extremism that might alienate potential Catholic supporters. It's a delicate balance that will serve you well in years to come. But your most dangerous moment comes not from religious politics, but from something far more personal. In 1547, You go to live with your father's widow, Catherine Parr, who has remarried Thomas Seymour, brother of the Lord Protector Somerset. Seymour is handsome, charming, and utterly without scruples. Exactly the kind of man who ruins young women's lives for sport. He begins playfully visiting your bedchamber in the mornings, sometimes in his nightgown, tickling you and engaging in what he calls harmless fun. Catherine Parr initially joins in these games, but even she begins to see that her husband's interest in you is becoming inappropriate. The situation reaches a crisis when she finds you in Thomas Seymour's arms, and you're sent away from their household immediately. You're only 14, and you've narrowly avoided a scandal that could have destroyed your chances of succession forever. A royal bastard caught in a compromising position with the Lord Protector's brother. It would have been political suicide. You learn another crucial lesson. Relationships, personal relationships, are always political when you're royal, and passion is a luxury you can't afford. Seymour doesn't give up. He writes you letters, sending messages through servants, even proposing marriage. When these advances are discovered, he's arrested and executed for treason. You're questioned extensively about your relationship with him, and your answers are masterful in their careful ambiguity. I have never written to him or met with him without witnesses, you tell the council investigators. It's technically true, though it elides the morning visits and physical contact that could have ruined you. Your brother Edward, meanwhile, is proving to be as formidable in his way as your father was. Despite his youth, he's highly intelligent and deeply committed to Protestant reform. He likes you and trusts you, but he's also aware that you represent a potential threat to his religious settlement. If something happens to him and you become queen, will you maintain the Protestant settlement or revert to Catholicism to win popular support? You walk this tightrope carefully, attending Protestant services with apparent enthusiasm while maintaining cordial relationships with Catholic nobles. You dress more modestly than court fashion dictates, avoiding the kind of display that might be seen as frivolous or papist. Your household becomes a model of Protestant piety and classical learning, attracting scholars and reformers from across Europe. As Edward's health begins to fail in 1552, the succession question becomes urgent. Under your father's will and the Act of Succession, Mary is next in line, then you. But Mary is a Catholic who would certainly reverse the Protestant Reformation, and the Protestant establishment is terrified. John Dudley, now Duke of Northumberland and effectively ruling England, hatches a desperate plan to alter the succession. He convinces the dying Edward to sign a new succession document, naming Lady Jane Grey, Northumberland's daughter-in-law, as his heir. Jane is Protestant, she's royal, descended from Henry VIII's sister, and most importantly, she's married to Northumberland's son. It's a coup disguised as a legal succession. When Edward dies in July 1553, you're at Hunsdon when news reaches you. Northumberland's men are also heading your way, intending to arrest both you and Mary to prevent any challenge to Jane Grey's accession. But you've learned your father's gift for swift, decisive action when it matters most. You flee toward the coast, ready to escape to the continent if necessary, while sending messages to Mary pledging your support. It's a crucial decision. You could have pressed your own claim you are more popular than Mary, more acceptable to Protestants, and have a better grasp of statecraft. But you recognize that Mary's claim is legally stronger, and more importantly, that challenging her would likely result in a civil war you're not certain to win. Instead, you choose to support her rights, gambling that your loyalty will be remembered and rewarded. Mary's support proves overwhelming. The English people, whatever their religious preferences, believe in legitimate succession, and Jane Grey's claim is transparently fraudulent. Within 9 days, Jane's brief reign is over, Northumberland is under arrest, and Mary is riding triumphantly into London. You ride beside her, sharing in her triumph, but already wondering what this victory will mean for England's Protestants and for you. Your half-sister Mary's coronation is magnificent, but the celebrations mask growing tensions that will soon engulf England in religious violence. Mary is 37, unmarried, and determined to restore England to Catholicism. She genuinely believes that Protestant heresy has damned English souls, and that only by returning to the true faith can she save her people, even if saving them requires burning them alive. Initially, Mary treats you with genuine affection. You supported her claim against Jane Grey when it mattered most, and she's grateful. She gives you precedence at court as her heir presumptive, increases your household allowance, and even discusses potential marriage alliances for you. But this honeymoon period doesn't last long. The problem is religion. Mary insists that you attend Catholic Mass, and you comply, but reluctantly and with obvious discomfort that everyone notices. You complain of headaches during services, arrive late, and leave early. When Mary questions you privately about your faith, your answers are evasive masterpieces of diplomatic ambiguity. I was brought up in the faith my father established, you tell her, one tense afternoon in her private apartments. I pray daily for guidance to do what is right. It's an answer that commits you to nothing while seeming to express filial piety and religious devotion. Mary's not fooled, but she's not sure what to do about it either. The situation becomes more dangerous when Mary announces her intention to marry Prince Philip of Spain, son of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. This is deeply unpopular with the English people, who fear foreign domination and Catholic restoration. In January 1554, Sir Thomas Wyatt leads a rebellion aimed at preventing the marriage, and some rebels speak of putting you on the throne instead of Mary. You're at court when news of the rebellion arrives, and you watch Mary's reaction carefully. Your sister shows unexpected steel, refusing to flee London, and instead rallying her supporters with a speech that reminds everyone why the Tudors have been successful rulers. I will never be by violence constrained to match with any, she declares. I am already married to this realm of England. But Mary's courage doesn't prevent her from suspecting everyone around her, including you. When some of Wyatt's followers are found to have written letters in your name, letters you insist are forgeries, you're arrested and taken to the Tower of London, the same fortress where your mother died 18 years earlier. The Tower, in March 1554, is a place of terror and despair. You're housed in the same apartments where Anne Boleyn spent her final days, and the parallel is lost on no one. Mary's counsellors are convinced you're involved in the rebellion and push for your trial and execution. Only Mary's personal reluctance to kill her own sister and the lack of concrete evidence against you saves your life. Your interrogations are brutal affairs. Stephen Gardiner, Mary's Lord Chancellor, is convinced of your guilt and presses you relentlessly, but your education serves you well. You answer every question with careful precision, admitting nothing while appearing cooperative. When asked about letters allegedly written in your name, you respond, I never wrote any such letters, nor did I ever give anyone authority to write in my name. The political situation saves you as much as your careful answers. Wyatt, under torture, refuses to implicate you directly. More importantly, Mary needs you alive. If she dies without children, you're still the legal heir. And executing you might provoke the very rebellion that keeping you alive helps prevent. After 2 months in the Tower, you're released but not freed. You're taken to Woodstock Palace in Oxfordshire, a semi-ruined royal residence that's more prison than palace. Here, under the watchful eye of Sir Henry Bedingfield, you begin what amounts to house arrest that will last nearly a year. Woodstock is a miserable place, damp, cold, and isolated. Your household is reduced to a handful of servants. Your correspondence is monitored and visitors are forbidden. Bedingfield is a conscientious but unimaginative man who takes his duties seriously, monitoring your every move and reporting your activities to the Privy Council. But isolation has its advantages. Away from court intrigue, you can think and plan. You establish a routine of prayer, study, and exercise that helps maintain your physical and mental health. You write poetry, some of it about your situation, some of it safely abstract. You translate classical texts and correspond with scholars across Europe, maintaining the intellectual connections that will serve you well later. Most importantly, you develop the patience that will become one of your greatest political assets. You learn to wait, to endure, to survive, without compromising your core beliefs while avoiding unnecessary provocation. It's a skill that serves you well when Mary's persecution of Protestants begins in earnest. Starting in 1555, Mary's government begins burning Protestant leaders at the stake. Nearly 300 people die in 4 years, including Archbishop Thomas Cranmer and Bishops Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley. The executions are meant to terrify Protestants into submission, but they backfire spectacularly, earning Mary the nickname Bloody Mary and turning Protestant victims into martyrs. You watch this persecution from Woodstock with horror, but also with calculation. Each execution strengthens Protestant determination and weakens Mary's popularity. You're careful never to express approval of the burnings, but you also avoid criticizing them directly. Either position could be fatal. In 1555, you're finally allowed to return to Hatfield, though still under informal surveillance. Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain has proven unpopular, but politically stable, and there are hopes that she might yet produce an heir. If she does, your own succession becomes unlikely, but it would also remove you as a potential threat. Mary experiences what she believes to be pregnancy twice, but both prove to be phantom pregnancies brought on by stress and her desperate desire for a child. As it becomes clear that she will die childless, her treatment of you gradually softens. She needs you to be ready to rule, even if she wishes the succession could go elsewhere. Your final years, under Mary, are a masterclass in political survival. You attend court when required, participate in Catholic ceremonies with apparent compliance, and maintain cordial relationships with both Catholics and Protestants. You avoid committing yourself to any particular religious faction while keeping channels open to all of them. When Mary falls seriously ill in 1558, she finally acknowledges the inevitable. You will be her successor, and despite her religious disappointments, she recognizes your intelligence and competence. On her deathbed, she sends you her blessing and her hope that you will maintain the Catholic faith, a hope you receive politely without promising anything specific. On the 17th of November 1558, Mary dies and you become Queen Elizabeth I. You're 25 years old and you've survived what would have destroyed most people. You've learned patience, diplomacy, and the art of political survival. But now comes the hardest test of all, actually ruling England. You're sitting under the great oak tree at Hatfield when the riders approach. It's the 17th of November, 1558, and you're reading Cicero in the pale autumn sunlight, as you have so many mornings before. But today is different. The men dismounting from their mud-splattered horses carry news that will transform your life forever. Mary is dead. You are Queen of England. As you kneel beneath the oak tree, receiving the homage of Mary's counsellors, the words of the 118th Psalm come to your lips. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvellous in our eyes. It's a moment of profound significance, not just personal triumph, but the opening of a new chapter in English history. At 25, you're educated, experienced in survival, and utterly determined to succeed where others have failed. Your first challenge is forming a government. Mary's counsellors kneel before you, offering their services, but you know that most of them cannot be trusted. They served your Catholic sister faithfully, and their religious convictions make them unreliable servants for a Protestant queen. You need new faces, new blood, people whose fortunes are tied to yours rather than to the past. Your most crucial appointment is William Cecil as your principal secretary. Cecil is a Protestant, a brilliant administrator, and most importantly, a man who understands that his own survival depends on your success. He served briefly under Edward VI and survived Mary's reign by keeping his head down and his convictions private. Now, at 38, he's ready to help you transform England. This judgment I have of you, you tell him at your first meeting, that you will not be corrupted by any manner of gift, and that you will be faithful to the state. Cecil will prove to be the most important relationship of your reign, part advisor, part father figure, part loyal servant. Together, you will navigate the treacherous waters of 16th century politics for the next 40 years. Your coronation on the 15th of January, 1559, is a masterpiece of political theatre. You process through London in a litter covered with gold brocade, wearing robes of crimson velvet lined with ermine. The crowds are enormous and enthusiastic. England is ready for a change from Mary's bloody reign. You stop frequently to accept flowers from children, to listen to speeches from city officials, and to bless the crowds that press forward to see their new queen. At Westminster Abbey, you're crowned by Owen Oglethorpe, Bishop of Carlisle. Most of Mary's bishops have refused to perform the ceremony for a Protestant queen. The service is conducted in English rather than Latin, a clear signal of the religious changes to come. When the heavy crown of Edward the Confessor is placed on your head, you're no longer the bastard princess, the survivor, the careful diplomat. You are Elizabeth I, by the grace of God, Queen of England and Ireland. But pageantry is easier than governance. The England you inherit is a mess. The treasury is nearly empty after Mary's expensive war with France. The religious settlement is unstable, with Catholics and Protestants eyeing each other suspiciously. Scotland is dominated by French troops supporting Mary, Queen of Scots Regency. Spain controls the Netherlands and much of Italy. France is still officially at war with England. You're surrounded by Catholic powers, ruling a divided country with an empty treasury. Your first parliament, which meets in January 1559, must address the religious question immediately. Mary's Catholic restoration has left England in religious limbo and officially Catholic, but with a large Protestant population that suffered terribly during the burnings. You need a settlement that will satisfy Protestants without provoking Catholic rebellion or foreign intervention. The Elizabethan religious settlement that emerges is a masterpiece of political compromise. The Act of Supremacy makes you supreme governor, not supreme head, a subtle distinction that acknowledges your gender of the Church of England. The Act of Uniformity establishes a new Book of Common Prayer that's Protestant in theology but conservative in ceremony. Church services will be in English, but churches can keep their decorations. Clergy can marry, but Catholic-minded priests can still serve if they keep their opinions private. Most importantly, you establish the principle that will define your reign. You don't want windows into men's souls. As long as your subjects attend church and don't openly challenge your authority, you won't inquire too closely into their private beliefs. It's a pragmatic approach that allows England to heal from the religious divisions of the previous reigns. Your religious settlement faces immediate challenges. The Marian bishops almost all refuse to accept it and are replaced by Protestant appointees. Some radical Protestants think your settlement too conservative and push for further reforms. Catholics in northern England begin to organise resistance. But the settlement holds, partly because of your firmness and partly because most English people are simply tired of religious conflict. Foreign policy requires even more delicate handling. You're still officially at war with France, but you can't afford to fight. Peace negotiations at Cateau Cambrousis result in England losing Calais, the last English possession in France, and a humiliating blow to national pride. But peace also allows you to focus on domestic issues and avoid the ruinous expense of foreign war. The question of your marriage dominates diplomatic discussions. You're 25, considered past the ideal marriageable age, but still capable of bearing children. Every major European power has a candidate. Archduke Charles of Austria, Eric XIV of Sweden, various French princes. Marriage could bring a powerful alliance, but it could also compromise your independence and bring foreign influence into English government. Your parliament addresses the marriage question directly, sending a delegation to request that you marry and produce an heir. Your response is a masterpiece of diplomatic evasion. Whensoever it may please God to incline my heart to another kind of life, ye may well assure yourselves my meaning is not to do or determine anything wherewith the realm may or shall have just cause to be discontented. It sounds like you're open to marriage while committing to nothing specific. In reality, you're already beginning to develop the strategy that will define your reign, using the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tool while avoiding its constraints. You're discovering that being an unmarried queen gives you unique power. You can negotiate with everyone while being controlled by no one. By the end of your first year as queen, you've established the patterns that will characterize your entire reign. You've created a religious settlement that provides stability without requiring uniformity. You've assembled a government of talented administrators loyal to you personally. You've ended foreign war while maintaining England's international standing. Most importantly, you've established yourself not as a temporary placeholder waiting for a husband, but as a queen in your own right. The bastard princess has become a master of statecraft, and England has found its greatest ruler. Your court becomes a stage where personal desire and political necessity perform their eternal, dangerous dance. At its centre stands Robert Dudley, the man who will complicate your life, challenge your judgment, and perhaps capture your heart more completely than any crown ever could. You've known Robin Dudley since childhood. You were both prisoners in the Tower during Mary's reign, both survivors of Tudor politics, both marked by the kind of shared experience that creates unbreakable bonds. When you become queen, you immediately appoint him Master of the Horse, a position that requires his constant presence at court and gives him more access to you than any other man enjoys. Robert is everything a romantic hero should be: tall, dark-haired, athletic, and possessed of the kind of magnetic charm that makes both men and women take notice when he enters a room. He's also married to Amy Robsart, a country gentlewoman he wed years earlier in a love match that now seems like a political disaster. As your favourite, he attracts attention from every foreign ambassador and court gossip in England. The gossip begins almost immediately. You dance with Robin at every opportunity. You give him gifts, jewels, lands, positions at court. You're seen together constantly, often in circumstances that fuel speculation about the nature of your relationship. When the Spanish ambassador reports to Philip II that you visit Dudley in his chambers, the rumours cross international boundaries and become diplomatic concerns. Your Privy Council watches this relationship with growing alarm. William Cecil, in particular, understands that marriage to Dudley would be politically catastrophic. He's not royal, he's not foreign, so no useful alliance. And his family history is disastrous. His father was the Duke of Northumberland, who tried to put Jane Grey on the throne. His grandfather was Henry VII's notorious tax collector. Most damaging of all, he's already married. But you seem oblivious to these political realities, or perhaps you simply don't care. You create him Earl of Leicester in 1564, a ceremony where you playfully tickle his neck as you invest him with the robes of nobility. Foreign observers are scandalized. Your own courtiers are mortified. But you appear to be enjoying yourself for perhaps the first time in your adult life. The Amy Robsart problem resolves itself in the most scandalous way possible. In September 1560, she's found dead at the bottom of a staircase at Cumnor Place, her neck broken. The coroner's jury rules it an accident, but rumours immediately spread that she was murdered to clear the way for Dudley to marry you. Whether the death was accident, suicide, or murder becomes irrelevant, the scandal makes marriage to Dudley politically impossible. You're devastated by the scandal, but also freed by it. Dudley is now available, but marrying him would confirm every whisper about your moral character and his murderous ambitions. Instead, you use the situation to your advantage. You keep Dudley close as your favourite and confidant, but you also make it clear that marriage is now impossible. You can enjoy his companionship without the political complications that marriage would bring. Meanwhile, foreign suitors continue to present themselves. Archduke Charles of Austria seems the most serious possibility. He's Catholic, but reportedly moderate. He's connected to the powerful Habsburg family, and marriage to him would give England a valuable ally against France. Negotiations drag on for years, with you expressing interest while raising obstacles. Charles must visit England first. He must learn English. He must accept some form of Protestant worship. Your parliament grows increasingly frustrated with your evasiveness about marriage. In 1566, they refuse to grant you financial subsidies unless you promise to marry or officially name an heir. Your response is magnificent in its imperious anger. I will never, in that matter, conclude anything that shall be prejudicial to the realm, for the weal, good, and safety whereof I will never shun to spend my life. You're learning to use your gender as a political weapon. Male kings are expected to marry and produce heirs quickly. It's a duty, not a choice. But as a queen regnant, your marriage is both more crucial, the dynasty depends on it, and more dangerous. A foreign husband might dominate you. An English husband might not be strong enough to support you. This paradox gives you room to maneuver that no king would have. The marriage negotiations become an art form under your guidance. You encourage every suitor just enough to keep them interested, but you always find reasons to delay final commitment. You're too busy with rebellion in Ireland. The religious differences need more discussion. Your parliament needs to approve the match. There are always more details to negotiate, more conditions to meet, more delays to justify. Your courtiers begin to understand that the marriage game is really about something else entirely, too. Keeping England's options open, preventing hostile alliances against you, and maintaining your personal independence. Foreign princes compete for your hand, which means they can't easily combine against England. As long as you might marry a Habsburg, France can't assume English hostility. As long as you might marry a French prince, Spain must treat England with respect. But the emotional cost of this strategy becomes apparent in your relationship with Dudley. You love him, perhaps not with overwhelming passion, but certainly with deep affection and trust. Yet you can never marry him without destroying your political position. You create him, Earl of Leicester, partly as compensation for what you cannot give him, but also as a demonstration to other suitors that you're capable of deep affection. In 1570, you finally end the negotiations with Archduke Charles, citing irreconcilable religious differences. It's the last serious marriage negotiation you'll conduct with a foreign prince. At 37, you're approaching the age where childbearing becomes dangerous, and the political advantages of remaining unmarried are becoming clear to everyone, including yourself. Your relationship with Leicester continues, but it's changing. He's no longer the desperate suitor hoping for marriage, but a trusted confidant who understands his role in your life and accepts it. When he secretly marries Lettice Knollys in 1578, you're furious, not because you wanted to marry him yourself, but because he acted without your permission. It's a reminder that even your closest relationships exist within the context of your royal authority. By 1570, you've established the pattern that will define your personal life. You'll use the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tool. You'll enjoy the company of attractive, intelligent men, but you'll never surrender the independence that makes your rule possible. The Virgin Queen is being born, not from lack of opportunity or desire, but from a calculated understanding of what power requires. The autumn of 1569 brings the greatest domestic crisis of your reign so far. In the cold northern counties of England, where Catholic traditions run deep and loyalty to the crown has always been conditional, rebellion is stirring. The Earls of Northumberland and Westmoreland, two of England's most powerful Catholic nobles, are preparing to march south with the goal of deposing you and placing your Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. You're at Greenwich Palace when the first reports arrive. Cecil bursts into your private apartments, his usually composed face showing unusual strain. Majesty, we have disturbing intelligence from the north. The earls are gathering men. Their intentions appear treasonous. You set down your book, you've been reading Tacitus on the fall of republics, and feel the familiar chill that accompanies moments of genuine danger. The rebellion has been months in the making. Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, England's premier peer and a crypto-Catholic, has been negotiating secretly to marry Mary, Queen of Scots. Such a marriage would unite the claims of England's most powerful duke with the woman many Catholics consider England's rightful queen. When you discover these negotiations and summon Norfolk to court for questioning, he flees instead to his estates, signalling open defiance. In the northern counties, where feudal loyalty still matters more than royal authority, the Catholic earls see their opportunity. They're gambling that Catholic England will rise in support of the old religion, that Spain will send military aid, and that your Protestant government will crumble under coordinated assault. It's a desperate throw of the dice, but from their perspective, it might be their last chance to restore England to Catholicism. The rebellion begins in earnest in November 1569. The earls gather at Durham Cathedral, where they tear down Protestant communion tables and restore Catholic altars. Mass is celebrated in Latin for the first time in your reign. The rebels' banner shows the 5 wounds of Christ, the symbol of Catholic resistance. Their proclamation declares that they march to restore the ancient Catholic faith and preserve the person of the Queen of Scots. But the rebellion reveals its fatal weakness almost immediately. It's a revolt of the past, trying to recreate a world that no longer exists. The earls expect their tenants to follow them automatically, as they would have done 50 years earlier. Instead, many refuse to join, and those who do serve reluctantly. England has changed during your 11-year reign. Even in the Catholic North, people have gotten used to Protestant rule, and more importantly, they've gotten used to peace and prosperity. Your response is swift and decisive. You appoint the Earl of Sussex as your lieutenant in the north, with authority to suppress the rebellion by any means necessary. More importantly, you make it clear that this isn't a religious war, but a rebellion against lawful authority. Your proclamations emphasize that you're defending English independence against foreign interference, not Protestant theology against Catholic doctrine. The military campaign is almost anticlimactic. As royal forces approach, the rebels' support melts away. Their army dwindles from thousands to hundreds to dozens. By December, the earls are fleeing across the border into Scotland, leaving their followers to face royal justice. The great Catholic rising that was supposed to restore England to the true faith collapses without a single major battle. Your retribution is calculated and terrible. You order the execution of roughly 750 rebels, not the great lords who fled, but the common people who followed them. It's a deliberate policy of terror designed to ensure that Northern England never again mistakes Catholic nostalgia for political reality. Sussex writes to you with some concern about the scale of the executions, but you're unmoved. We think it necessary that a good number of the common sort who have been chief in this rebellion should be executed by martial law. The rebellion's failure has international consequences. Spain, which had been considering intervention, decides that English Catholicism is too weak to justify military support. France, already dealing with its own religious wars, concludes that you're more firmly established than they had hoped. Most importantly, your Protestant subjects rally to your defence with an enthusiasm that surprises even your supporters. But the greatest victim of the Northern Rebellion is Mary, Queen of Scots herself. She's been your prisoner since 1568, when she fled Scotland after losing a civil war to her own Protestant nobles. You've kept her in comfortable captivity, partly from family loyalty and partly because executing an anointed queen would set a dangerous precedent. But her involvement in Norfolk's marriage scheme and her role as the intended beneficiary of the Northern Rebellion makes her presence in England untenable. In 1570, Pope Pius V makes the situation worse by issuing the bull Regnans in Excelsis, which formally excommunicates you and releases English Catholics from their allegiance to you. The papal bull declares you the pretended Queen of England and the servant of crime, and commands Catholics to overthrow you. It's a propaganda disaster that turns every English Catholic into a potential traitor in Protestant eyes. You respond to the papal bull with characteristic defiance mixed with political calculation. You don't persecute Catholics simply for their beliefs, but you do make it clear that political loyalty to England must take precedence over religious loyalty to Rome. The Treason Act of 1571 makes it treasonous to call you a heretic or to bring papal bulls into England. You're walking a fine line between religious tolerance and national security. The discovery of the Ridolfi plot in 1571 proves that the dangers are real. Roberto Ridolfi, an Italian banker living in London, has been coordinating plans for a Spanish invasion that would coincide with an English Catholic uprising. The plot involves Philip II of Spain, the Pope, Mary Queen of Scots, and once again the Duke of Norfolk. When Francis Walsingham's intelligence network uncovers the conspiracy, you finally have the evidence you need to act decisively. Norfolk's trial in 1572 provides a stage for you to demonstrate the consequences of treason. The man who might have been king consort if Mary had succeeded to your throne is instead condemned to death for plotting your assassination. His execution sends a clear message. Noble birth and great wealth provide no protection for traitors. The Duke of Norfolk becomes the last duke executed in England until the 20th century. But the pressure to execute Mary herself becomes overwhelming. Your Parliament, your Privy Council, and your Protestant subjects all demand her death. She's been the focal point of every Catholic plot against you, and as long as she lives, she'll continue to attract conspiracies. Yet, you hesitate. Executing an anointed queen, even a rival queen, feels like crossing a line that can never be uncrossed. For now, you compromise. Mary remains under close guard but keeps her head. You're not ready to take that final step, though events will eventually force your hand. The Northern Rebellion is over, but the Catholic threat to your rule has been exposed as real and ongoing. You've survived the greatest domestic crisis of your reign, but you've also learned that your throne will never be entirely secure as long as Catholic Europe sees you as a usurper. The lessons of 1569 to 1572 shape the rest of your reign. You understand that religious loyalty and political loyalty can conflict, that noble blood doesn't guarantee political wisdom, and that mercy toward traitors can be interpreted as weakness. You're still the same woman who prefers compromise to confrontation, but you're also learning when compromise becomes surrender. England emerges from this crisis stronger and more united, but also more suspicious of Catholic intentions and foreign interference. The Elizabethan surveillance state begins to take shape under Francis Walsingham's guidance, and the identification of Catholicism with treason becomes a cornerstone of English Protestant nationalism. You've survived your first great test as queen, but the price of survival is the gradual hardening of your regime. Your court, in the 1570 seconds, becomes the beating heart of a cultural revolution that will echo through the centuries. Greenwich Palace, Whitehall, and your other residences fill with an extraordinary collection of poets, playwrights, musicians, scholars, and adventurers who transform England from a peripheral European kingdom into a centre of learning and artistic achievement that rivals Renaissance Italy. The change is partly deliberate policy and partly happy accident. You genuinely love learning and surround yourself with intelligent, educated people who stimulate your own considerable intellect. Your courtiers quickly learn that the path to royal favour lies not just through political service, but through wit, learning, and cultural refinement. The result is a court where philosophical debates are as common as political discussions, where new plays are performed for appreciative royal audiences, and where poets compete for your attention with the same intensity that soldiers seek military commands. Edmund Spenser dedicates his masterpiece, The Fairy Queen, to you as Gloriana, the fairy queen whose virtue illuminates her entire realm. It's more than flattery. Spenser genuinely sees your court as a place where idealized chivalric values can flourish in a modern setting. When you read his elaborate allegories that cast you as the embodiment of divine virtue triumphing over error and evil, you understand that you've become not just a political leader, but a cultural symbol. The universities of Oxford and Cambridge experience a renaissance under your patronage. You visit both regularly, engaging in Latin disputations with professors and students that demonstrate your own formidable education while encouraging scholarly excellence. When you speak extempore in Latin at Oxford in 1566, praising learning as the foundation of good government, the assembled scholars are astounded by both your linguistic skill and your intellectual sophistication. Your court becomes a magnet for European scholars fleeing religious persecution on the continent. Protestant intellectuals driven out of France, the Netherlands, and the German states find refuge in England, bringing with them new ideas about theology, natural philosophy, and statecraft. The cross-pollination of English and continental learning accelerates innovations in everything from mathematics to cartography to military engineering. Music flourishes under your patronage with an intensity that transforms English cultural life. Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, whom you appoint as joint organists of the Chapel Royal, create compositions that blend English and continental styles into something entirely new. Your court musicians perform not just traditional church music, but also madrigals, lute songs, and elaborate instrumental pieces that make your entertainments the envy of Europe. You're a skilled musician yourself, playing the virginals with considerable ability and composing songs that your courtiers perform with careful attention to your reactions. Music becomes a language of courtship and diplomacy at your court. Foreign ambassadors who can perform creditably on lute or virginals find easier access to your presence, while English courtiers who lack musical skills struggle to maintain your interest. But the most remarkable cultural development of your reign is the explosion of English drama. When you become queen, English theatre scarcely exists as an art form. By 1580, London supports multiple theatres where audiences from all social classes gather to watch plays that rival anything produced in classical Athens or Renaissance Italy. Your court's appetite for theatrical entertainment drives much of this development. The players who perform at court, the Lord Chamberlain's men, the Admiral's men, and other companies, must constantly create new material to satisfy your sophisticated tastes. The result is an outpouring of dramatic creativity that produces Christopher Marlowe, whose Tamburlaine and Dr. Faustus electrify audiences with their psychological complexity and poetic power. More significantly, it nurtures William Shakespeare, whose career begins in the 1,580 seconds, and who will eventually create the greatest body of dramatic literature in the English language. You attend theatrical performances with the enthusiasm of a true devotee, often calling for specific scenes to be repeated and engaging the actors in discussions about their interpretations. Your courtiers quickly learn to appreciate drama as a mark of cultural sophistication, while London's growing merchant class discovers that theatre attendance signals social ambition and refinement. This cultural flowering occurs alongside, and partly because of extraordinary economic growth. England in the 1,570 seconds is experiencing the kind of commercial expansion that transforms entire societies. The population is growing, agricultural productivity is increasing, and most importantly, English merchants are discovering global markets that promise unprecedented profits. The Muscovy Company, established earlier in your reign, has opened trade routes to Russia that bring English woolens and manufactured goods into vast new markets, while importing furs, timber, and other northern products. The Levant Company creates trading relationships with the Ottoman Empire that give English merchants access to silk, spices, and other luxury goods previously monopolized by Italian city-states. Most dramatically, English sea captains like Francis Drake are challenging Spanish control of the Atlantic. Drake's circumnavigation of the globe, 1577 to 1580, is officially a trading voyage. But everyone understands that it's really a reconnaissance mission and raiding expedition that brings back Spanish treasure while mapping Spanish weaknesses. When Drake returns with a ship full of silver and his hold filled with evidence of Spanish vulnerability, you knight him aboard his ship, the Golden Hind, in a ceremony that signals England's emergence as a global maritime power. Your court becomes a centre of geographical learning where the latest maps are studied with the intensity that other courts devote to military intelligence. John Dee, your court astronomer and mathematician, maintains correspondence with cartographers across Europe and advises you on navigation, exploration, and colonial possibilities. The famous Mercator projection map hangs in your private study, marked with notations about potential English trading routes and colonial sites. But perhaps most importantly, you preside over the development of a distinctly English cultural identity that combines classical learning, Protestant theology, and emerging nationalism into something unprecedented in European experience. Your court poets don't just imitate Italian models, but create uniquely English literary forms. Your court musicians blend continental techniques with English folk traditions. Your court scholars develop new approaches to history, law, and natural philosophy that reflect English experiences and values. The England of 1580 is utterly different from the England you inherited in 1558. What began as a small, peripheral kingdom threatened by Catholic enemies and internal religious division has become a confident nation that sees itself as divinely chosen to lead Protestant Europe while building a global commercial empire. The transformation isn't complete. The Spanish threat remains real. Catholic conspiracies continue, and economic growth brings social tensions. But the foundations of England's golden age are solidly established. You understand that cultural achievement and political power reinforce each other in ways that pure military might cannot match. An England that produces great poets, musicians, and scholars commands respect from European intellectuals, even when English armies are too small to threaten major continental powers. Culture becomes a form of soft power that extends English influence far beyond what military force could achieve. As you enter your 40s, still unmarried but no longer pressed constantly about succession, you begin to understand that you're creating something unprecedented, a female-ruled state that derives its authority not from military conquest or dynastic inheritance alone, but from cultural achievement, commercial success, and the voluntary loyalty of subjects who see their own prosperity and security as inseparable from your continued rule. In 1578, at age 45, you embark on the strangest and most controversial courtship of your reign. Francois, Duke of Anjou, brother of the French king, has proposed marriage through intermediaries, and, against all expectations, you seem genuinely interested. Your courtiers are bewildered, your councillors are horrified, and your people are suspicious of French intentions. But for 4 years, you will conduct a romance, or the elaborate pretense of one, that keeps all Europe guessing about your true intentions. Anjou is everything your previous suitors were not. At 23, he's 22 years younger than you, making the age gap scandalous by contemporary standards. He's Catholic in a militantly Protestant England. He's French at a time when France is viewed with deep suspicion. Most damaging of all to his romantic prospects, he's reportedly ugly, scarred by smallpox, and possessed of what even diplomatic sources describe as an unfortunately prominent nose. Yet something about this unlikely suitor captures your attention. Perhaps it's his wit and intelligence which shine through even the formal diplomatic correspondence that begins the courtship. Perhaps it's the political advantages that marriage to France's royal family might bring. Or perhaps, at 45, you're finally allowing yourself to consider the possibility of marriage not as a political necessity, but as a personal choice. The courtship begins through Jean de Simier, Anjou's master of the wardrobe, who arrives at your court in January 1579 as his master's representative. Simier is everything a diplomatic envoy should be: charming, sophisticated, and possessed of the kind of continental polish that makes English courtiers seem provincial by comparison. You nickname him your monkey and shower him with attention that makes your English favourites jealous and suspicious. Through Simier, you begin a correspondence with Anjou that grows increasingly personal and affectionate. Your letters, written in French, show a playfulness and emotional openness that your English correspondences rarely display. You sign yourself your very assured good friend, and later, she who loves you more than any person in the world. These aren't the usual diplomatic pleasantries. They suggest genuine feeling, or at least a masterful simulation of it. Your Privy Council watches this developing relationship with mounting alarm. William Cecil, now Lord Burghley, has spent 20 years helping you avoid unwanted marriages, and he cannot understand why you're encouraging this most unsuitable of suitors. Francis Walsingham is more direct in his opposition, warning that marriage to a Catholic French prince would undermine everything you've achieved in religious and foreign policy. The opposition crystallizes around a pamphlet written by John Stubbs called The Discovery of a Gaping Gulf Whereinto England is Like to be Swallowed by Another French Marriage. Stubbs argues that marriage to Anjou would make England a French satellite, compromise the Protestant settlement, and put your life in danger from a husband young enough to outlive you by decades. The pamphlet expresses what many English people are thinking, but don't dare say openly. Your response to Stubbs's pamphlet reveals the steel beneath your courtly manner. You order Stubbs's arrest and trial for seditious writing. When he's condemned to have his right hand cut off, the hand that wrote the offending words, Croof, you allow the sentence to be carried out, despite widespread sympathy for him. As the axe falls, Stubbs raises his hat with his left hand and cries, God save the Queen, before fainting. It's a reminder that even the most beloved ruler demands absolute respect for royal authority. In August 1579, Anjou himself arrives in England for a personal meeting. You've insisted that you must see him before committing to marriage, a demand that's both romantically appropriate and diplomatically shrewd. If you don't like him in person, you can end the courtship while blaming personal incompatibility rather than political calculation. The meeting exceeds all expectations. Anjou proves to be intelligent, charming, and surprisingly attractive despite his physical flaws. More importantly, he seems genuinely smitten with you, writing poetry in your honour and conducting himself with the kind of romantic devotion that's been absent from your previous courtships. For the first time in your life, you appear to be dealing with a suitor who wants you personally rather than just your throne. Your behaviour during Anjou's visit scandalises the court. You're seen walking with him in private, dining with him tea, and engaging in the kind of intimate conversation that suggests serious romantic interest. Foreign ambassadors report to their governments that the English Queen seems genuinely infatuated with her young French suitor. When Anjou leaves England in September, you're reportedly in tears. The courtship continues through letters and intermediaries for another 3 years, with periods of apparent progress followed by mysterious delays and complications. You send Anjou a ring as a token of affection, but when marriage contracts are actually drawn up, you raise objections about religious ceremony, about parliamentary approval, about the precise terms of a marriage treaty. Your behaviour suggests a woman torn between personal desire and political calculation. The crisis comes in 1581 when Anjou returns to England, and you appear ready to commit to marriage. In a scene that becomes legendary, you place a ring on his finger during a court ceremony and kiss him publicly, declaring that he is now your husband. Your courtiers are stunned. Foreign ambassadors rush to write dispatches, and England holds its breath. But within hours, you've changed your mind, or revealed that the public ceremony was theatre rather than commitment. You're closeted with your counsellors, who reportedly threaten resignation if you proceed with the marriage. More significantly, you receive delegations from London's merchants and Protestant leaders who make clear their opposition to a Catholic consort. The woman who has spent 23 years balancing competing interests recognises that this marriage would cost her more support than it could possibly gain. Your final rejection of Anjou is a masterpiece of diplomatic kindness mixed with political realism. You explain that your subjects' opposition makes marriage impossible, that you cannot ignore their wishes without undermining the consensual basis of your rule. You provide Anjou with a generous pension and promise continued friendship between England and France. Most importantly, you make it clear that the failure of the courtship reflects political realities, not personal rejection. The end of the Anjou courtship marks the end of your marriage prospects. At 48, you're past childbearing age, and the political advantages of remaining single have become obvious to everyone, including yourself. You've used marriage negotiations for 24 years to keep foreign powers competing for your favour while maintaining your personal and political independence. Now, with the marriage question finally settled, you can rule as what you've always been in practice. England's Virgin Queen, married to her realm and her people. Your courtiers gradually adjust to the reality that you will never marry. The succession question becomes less urgent as it becomes clear that James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Queen of Scots, will likely inherit your throne. More importantly, England itself has grown strong and confident enough to contemplate political continuity beyond your personal survival. The institutions you've built, the religious settlement you've established, and the cultural achievements you've fostered have created an England that can survive dynastic transition. The Anjou courtship, whether sincere or theatrical, represents the end of your youth and the beginning of your maturity as a monarch. You're no longer the young queen whose marriage might reshape European alliances, but the established ruler whose spinsterhood has become a source of strength rather than weakness. England has its Virgin Queen, and both Queen and Kingdom are discovering that unmarried doesn't mean unfulfilled. The letter arrives on a crisp October morning in 1586, brought by one of Francis Walsingham's agents, with hands that tremble slightly as he delivers it to your private study. The paper bears Mary Stuart's familiar handwriting, but the words make your blood run cold. Your cousin, your fellow queen, your prisoner of 18 years, has finally given you the evidence you've long dreaded, proof of her involvement in a plot to assassinate you. The Babington plot, as history will remember it, was Walsingham's masterpiece of entrapment. For months, his agents have been intercepting and copying Mary's secret correspondence, allowing her to believe she was communicating safely with Catholic conspirators while actually providing evidence of her treasonous intentions. The letter you now hold contains Mary's explicit approval of Anthony Babington's plan to murder you and place her on the English throne. You set the letter down with hands that shake, despite your efforts to remain composed. For 18 years, you've kept Mary alive, despite the urging of Parliament, your councillors, and your Protestant subjects. You've told yourself that executing an anointed queen would set a dangerous precedent, that showing mercy to a fellow sovereign demonstrated your own legitimacy. But Mary's own words have now made continued mercy impossible. The case against Mary is overwhelming. Walsingham has intercepted dozens of letters proving her involvement in the conspiracy. The plotters themselves have confessed under interrogation, providing detailed testimony about Mary's role in planning your assassination. Most damaging of all, Mary's letter explicitly states that the affairs being thus prepared, and forces in readiness both within and without the realm, then shall it be time to set the 6 gentlemen to work, a clear reference to the 6 conspirators assigned to kill you. Your councillors, led by Burghley and Walsingham, argue that you have no choice but to proceed with Mary's trial and execution. They point out that every Catholic plot against your throne for the past 15 years has centred on Mary as the alternative queen. As long as she lives, they argue, she'll continue to attract conspiracies, and eventually one will succeed. The security of your realm demands her death. But you hesitate, and your hesitation isn't entirely about political calculation. Mary is your cousin, the granddaughter of your father's sister, Margaret Tudor. She's a fellow queen who has suffered imprisonment, exile, and the loss of her own throne. More troubling still, executing her means acknowledging that royal blood provides no ultimate protection from the headsman's axe, a precedent that might someday apply to yourself. The trial of Mary Queen of Scots begins at Fotheringhay Castle in October 1586. You've chosen the location carefully, far from London and potential rescue attempts, but still within England proper to emphasise your authority. Mary initially refuses to recognise the court's jurisdiction, arguing that as a sovereign queen, she cannot be tried by English subjects. But when her commissioners make clear they'll proceed with or without her participation, she agrees to defend herself. Mary's defence is both legally sophisticated and emotionally powerful. She argues that she never accepted English citizenship, that her long imprisonment has been illegal, and that letters allegedly in her handwriting could have been forged. More pointedly, she questions whether a queen who has been held prisoner for 18 years can be held responsible for desperate attempts to regain her freedom. But the evidence against her is too strong to overcome. The court finds her guilty of treason and sentences her to death, as everyone expected. The real question now is whether you'll confirm the sentence and allow the execution to proceed. Your Parliament meets in emergency session to petition for Mary's death, arguing that your own safety and England's security demand it. Even your most moderate councillors agree that clemency is no longer possible. You sign Mary's death warrant on the 1st of February 1587, but your manner makes clear how much the decision costs you. Your secretary, William Davison, receives the signed warrant with instructions to have it sealed and prepared for execution, but you don't explicitly order him to deliver it to Fotheringhay. It's a deliberate ambiguity that allows you to claim later that you never intended immediate execution. Your councillors, however, understand that delay might mean a change of mind that could prove fatal to England's security. Without consulting you further, they dispatch the warrant to Fotheringhay with orders for immediate execution. It's a calculated risk. They're acting without explicit royal command, but they believe they're serving your interests, even if you can't bring yourself to give the final order personally. On the 8th of February 1587, Mary Queen of Scots walks into the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle for the last time. She's dressed in black velvet with a white veil, the colours of mourning but also of royal dignity. At 44, she retains traces of the beauty that once made her one of Europe's most sought-after princesses, but 18 years of imprisonment have taken their toll. The execution itself becomes a scene of high drama that enhances Mary's reputation even in death. She forgives her executioners, prays for her soul in Latin, and places her head on the block with composure that impresses even her enemies. When the axe falls, she dies with the dignity of a martyr, and Catholic Europe immediately begins treating her as exactly that. Your reaction to news of the execution is a masterpiece of political theatre mixed with genuine distress. You fly into a rage at your councillors for proceeding without your explicit command, banish Davison from court, and write letters to foreign monarchs expressing your grief at Mary's death. Some historians will argue that your anger is genuine, others that it's calculated performance designed to distance yourself from an unpopular decision. The truth is probably both. The international reaction is swift and severe. Philip II of Spain, already contemplating an invasion of England, now has the perfect justification for holy war. The Pope issues a bull calling for your overthrow and promising plenary indulgences to anyone who participates in your destruction. James VI of Scotland, Mary's son, protests his mother's execution but doesn't break relations with England. His own succession hopes depend on maintaining your favour, but the domestic reaction is overwhelmingly positive. Protestant England sees Mary's execution as long overdue justice for a woman who spent nearly 2 decades plotting against their beloved queen. Church bells ring in celebration, bonfires are lit in London streets, and Parliament sends delegations thanking you for finally eliminating the Catholic threat to English security. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. For the first time in your reign, you've executed a fellow monarch, establishing the precedent that royal blood provides no immunity from English justice. The decision makes war with Spain virtually inevitable, but it also demonstrates to your subjects and foreign enemies alike that you'll take any action necessary to defend your throne and your kingdom. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, marks the end of your reign's defensive phase. For 29 years, you've survived by being careful, diplomatic, and reluctant to take irreversible actions. But Mary's death signals that England is now strong enough to take decisive action against its enemies, regardless of the consequences. The Virgin Queen has become the warrior queen, and Europe will soon discover what that transformation means. The news reaches you on a fog-shrouded morning in December 1587, as you hold court at Greenwich Palace. Francis Walsingham enters your presence chamber with the grim expression that has become familiar whenever Spanish intelligence arrives. "Your Majesty," he says, bowing low, "our agents in Lisbon report that King Philip's preparations are nearly complete. The enterprise of England will sail with the spring tides. You've known this moment was coming since Mary Stuart's execution 10 months earlier. Philip II of Spain has spent years contemplating an invasion of England, but Mary's death gave him the perfect justification for holy war. The most Catholic king now styles himself the rightful heir to the English throne, claiming that your illegitimate birth and heretical faith make his own distant Tudor connections more valid than your direct descent from Henry VIII. The Spanish preparations are staggering in their scope. Philip has assembled the largest invasion fleet in European history, 130 ships carrying 30,000 men, including seasoned tercios from Spain's European wars. The plan is devastatingly simple. The Armada will sail up the English Channel, rendezvous with the Duke of Parma's army in the Netherlands, and escort 17,000 additional troops across the narrow seas to Kent. Once ashore, this combined force of nearly 50,000 veteran soldiers should be more than enough to crush English resistance and restore Catholic rule. Your own resources seem pitifully inadequate by comparison. The English Navy can muster perhaps 200 ships, but most are smaller than their Spanish counterparts, and many are armed merchantmen rather than purpose-built warships. Your army exists largely on paper. Quote, "The militia system provides bodies but little training, and you have no seasoned professional soldiers to match Spain's tercios. Most sobering of all, your treasury contains barely enough money to sustain a long campaign, but you have advantages that aren't immediately apparent to Spanish planners. Your ships are faster and more maneuverable than the Spanish galleons, designed for hit-and-run tactics rather than the close-quarters boarding actions that Spanish naval doctrine favours. Your sailors are experienced in Atlantic navigation and familiar with English coastal waters that will prove treacherous to foreign fleets. Most importantly, you have Francis Drake, the most feared sea captain in Europe and a man who knows Spanish weaknesses better than any admiral alive. The strategic situation clarifies in early 1588 as intelligence reports pour in from Walsingham's network of spies and informers across Europe. The Armada is gathering at Lisbon under the command of the Duke of Medina Sidonia, a competent administrator but inexperienced naval commander who has accepted the position reluctantly after the death of Spain's best admiral, the Marquis of Santa Cruz. Parma's army in the Netherlands is drilling constantly, preparing for the moment when Spanish ships will carry them across the Channel. Your response combines desperate improvisation with strategic brilliance. You appoint Charles Howard, Lord Admiral of England, as commander of your fleet, but you give Drake effective control of naval tactics. You order beacons prepared on every hilltop from Cornwall to Scotland, ready to carry news of invasion faster than any messenger could ride. Most daringly, you authorize Drake to attack the Spanish fleet while it's still preparing in port, a preemptive strike that violates every diplomatic convention but might save England from invasion. Drake's raid on Cadiz in April 1587, his famous singeing of the King of Spain's beard, destroys dozens of Spanish ships and thousands of tons of supplies, delaying the invasion by a full year. But perhaps more importantly, it demonstrates English resolve to fight rather than negotiate. Philip's assumption that you might surrender rather than face his overwhelming forces proves spectacularly wrong. The propaganda war begins months before the first Spanish sail appears on the horizon. Your court poets and pamphleteers portray the coming conflict as a struggle between freedom and tyranny, Protestant truth and Catholic superstition, English independence and foreign domination. The Spanish Inquisition becomes a central theme. English Protestant audiences are terrified by stories of Spanish religious persecution, and your government ensures that these stories circulate widely. But you also engage in subtle diplomatic efforts to limit the scope of the coming conflict. You send envoys to France, seeking assurance that Henry III won't assist Spain, and you receive private messages that French policy will be officially neutral despite Catholic sympathies. You open backdoor communications with the Netherlands, ensuring that Dutch rebels will continue fighting Parma's forces even if the invasion succeeds initially. In July 1588, the Great Fleet finally appears off the Cornish coast. The Armada, sailing in crescent formation, stretches for miles across the summer seas, a sight so magnificent and terrifying that English observers struggle to find words adequate to describe it. The Spanish ships are larger and more heavily armed than anything in the English fleet, and their disciplined formation suggests professional competence that makes your own naval preparations seem amateurish by comparison. But Howard and Drake have planned for exactly this scenario. Rather than meeting the Spanish fleet in the traditional head-on battle that would favour larger ships and heavier guns, the English fleet shadows the Armada up the channel, launching hit-and-run attacks that exploit English advantages in speed and manoeuvrability. The running battle that follows becomes a masterclass in naval innovation, as English tactics expose fatal flaws in Spanish planning. The Spanish formation, magnificent as it appears, proves to be a strategic weakness. Medina Sidonia's orders require him to maintain fleet integrity and proceed directly to his rendezvous with Parma, which means he cannot chase English attackers or respond effectively to harassment. The English ships dart in and out of Spanish formation like terriers baiting a bull, causing damage and confusion while avoiding decisive engagement. More crucially, the Spanish guns prove less effective than their impressive size suggested. Spanish naval doctrine emphasizes close quarters, combat and boarding actions, so their cannons are loaded with short-range shot designed to destroy rigging and kill personnel rather than sink ships. English gunners, trained for longer-range combat, can stand off and pound Spanish hulls with shot designed to hole enemy vessels below the waterline. The decisive moment comes off Calais, where the Armada anchors while waiting for Parma's army to embark. But Parma's forces aren't ready. Dutch rebels control the shallow coastal waters that Spanish ships cannot navigate, and the careful timing that Spanish strategy requires proves impossible to achieve. The Armada sits at anchor, vulnerable and increasingly desperate. Your admirals seize the opportunity with devastating effectiveness. On the night of the 7th of August, 8 English fireships loaded with combustible materials sail into the Spanish anchorage, forcing the enemy fleet to cut cables and scatter in panic. The careful Spanish formation dissolves into chaos, and individual ships become vulnerable to concentrated English attack. The Battle of Gravelines on the 8th of August becomes the climactic engagement of the entire campaign. The scattered Spanish fleet tries to reform while English ships pour devastating fire into individual galleons. The San Lorenzo runs aground and is captured. The San Mateo and San Felipe are so badly damaged they later sink, and dozens of other Spanish ships suffer heavy casualties from English gunnery. But perhaps most importantly, the battle demonstrates that English seamanship and tactics have evolved beyond Spanish understanding. Your captains have learned to use artillery as a ship-killing weapon rather than merely a prelude to boarding, and their crews have developed the discipline and skill needed to execute complex maneuvers under fire. The English fleet that fights at Gravelines is genuinely superior to its Spanish opponent in everything except raw size. With his fleet damaged and his rendezvous with Parma impossible, Medina Sidonia makes the only rational decision available: retreat. The Armada sails north around Scotland and Ireland, hoping to return to Spain while avoiding further English attacks. But the worst enemy proves to be weather rather than warfare. Atlantic storms batter the already damaged Spanish ships, driving dozens onto Irish rocks and drowning thousands of sailors who survived English guns. Meanwhile, you travel to Tilbury to review the army assembled to repel invasion. The sight that greets you there would have been impossible to imagine when you became queen 30 years earlier. 20,000 English soldiers ready to fight for their Protestant queen against the greatest Catholic power in Europe. These aren't professional troops like Spain's tercios, but they're fighting for their homes, their religion, and their queen. And their morale is extraordinary. Your speech at Tilbury becomes one of the most famous in English history. I know I have the body but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain, or any prince of Europe, should dare to invade the borders of my realm. You're wearing armour as you speak, symbolically sharing the dangers that your soldiers face while asserting your determination to lead them personally if necessary. The defeat of the Spanish Armada transforms England's international position overnight. The great fleet that was supposed to restore Catholic rule instead demonstrates English naval superiority and strategic competence. Philip II's reputation for invincibility lies in ruins along with dozens of his ships on Irish beaches. Most importantly, Protestant England has survived its greatest test and emerged stronger than ever. The domestic impact is equally profound. English Protestant nationalism, which has been developing slowly throughout your reign, crystallizes around the Armada victory into something approaching religious certainty. God has clearly chosen England as the defender of Protestant truth, and you are his chosen instrument for protecting his people from Catholic tyranny. The Virgin Queen becomes Gloriana, the divinely appointed ruler of a chosen nation. But you're too experienced a ruler to let victory create overconfidence. The defeat of the Armada doesn't end the Spanish threat. Philip will send other fleets, and the war will continue for another 15 years. What the victory does provide is breathing space and international credibility that allows England to play a larger role in European affairs. Your immediate response to victory combines thanksgiving with practical preparation for continued conflict. You order special church services celebrating divine deliverance, commission medals commemorating the victory, and ensure that news of English success spreads throughout Protestant Europe. But you also begin planning for the longer war that everyone now knows is coming. The England that emerges from the Armada crisis is fundamentally different from the kingdom you inherited in 1558. where once you ruled a small, divided nation on Europe's periphery, you now lead a confident maritime power that has proven its ability to defeat the greatest empire in the world. The transformation isn't complete. England won't become truly dominant until after your death, but the foundations of future greatness are now unshakably established. The decade following the Armada victory brings a gradual darkening of your reign's golden promise. England has proven it can defend itself against the greatest threats, but the prolonged war with Spain drains your treasury, exhausts your people, and creates new problems that prove more difficult to solve than foreign invasion. Most troubling of all, the aging process that spares no mortal begins to affect both your judgment and your court's dynamics in ways that threaten everything you've built. The war with Spain continues with grinding persistence that makes the Armada's defeat seem like only a temporary reprieve. Philip II, humiliated but not defeated, sends new fleets against England in 1596 and 1597, both scattered by storms but demonstrating his continued determination to overthrow your Protestant regime. English expeditions against Spanish territories achieve limited success. Drake and Hawkins both die on a failed raid against the Spanish Main, while the Earl of Essex's attack on Cadiz in 1596 provides glory but little strategic advantage. More seriously, the Irish situation deteriorates into full-scale rebellion that threatens to provide Spain with a foothold in the British Isles. Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone, leads a confederation of Irish lords in what becomes the 9 Years' War, a conflict that will ultimately consume more English resources than the entire Spanish conflict. Irish rebels receive Spanish weapons and advisors, turning what begins as a local uprising into another front in the broader European religious war. Your response to the Irish crisis reveals both your strategic acumen and the limitations imposed by age and distance from direct military experience. You appoint a series of commanders, the Earl of Essex, Lord Mountjoy, and others, but struggle to develop a coherent strategy for a conflict that requires both military force and political accommodation. The Irish rebels fight with guerrilla tactics that English armies, trained for European-style warfare, find difficult to counter. But the most serious threat to your later reign comes not from foreign enemies or Irish rebels, but from the changing dynamics of your own court. The generation of advisors who helped establish your rule, Cecil, Walsingham, Leicester, have died or grown old, replaced by younger men whose relationship with you is fundamentally different. Where your early favourites understood their dependence on your favour, the new generation sometimes mistakes your affection for weakness. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, embodies both the promise and the danger of your later favourites. Stepson of your beloved Leicester, Essex possesses the kind of charismatic masculinity that has always attracted you. He's handsome, brave, intellectually gifted, and utterly convinced of his own indispensability. When you appoint him to the Privy Council at age 23, he seems like the perfect combination of youthful energy and aristocratic authority that your aging government needs. Initially, Essex lives up to his promise. His raid on Cadiz in 1596 demonstrates personal courage and strategic competence that reminds everyone of Drake's earlier exploits. His cultural patronage supports promising poets and playwrights, including the young William Shakespeare, whose history plays reflect Essex's own understanding of honour and political ambition. Most importantly, Essex provides the kind of masculine energy that balances your court's increasingly feminine character as you age past childbearing and into the role of England's Virgin Queen. But Essex also possesses the fatal flaw of believing his own propaganda. Where Leicester understood that his position depended entirely on your continued favour, Essex begins to see himself as your natural successor in authority, if not in title. His followers at court develop into a faction that sometimes opposes your other advisors, particularly the Cecil family, in ways that threaten the careful balance you've maintained throughout your reign. The crisis develops gradually through a series of confrontations that reveal Essex's growing inability to accept criticism or restraint. When you reject his candidates for office, he sulks and threatens to withdraw from court. When you question his strategic decisions in Ireland, he responds with barely concealed insolence. Most dangerously, he begins to attract support from discontented nobles and ambitious courtiers who see in him a potential alternative centre of power. Your appointment of Essex as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland in 1599 represents either a masterstroke of political calculation or a serious error in judgment, and historians will debate which for centuries. On one hand, the Irish command gives Essex the opportunity to prove his military and administrative competence in the most challenging assignment available. On the other hand, it removes him from court at a time when his factional activities are becoming dangerous, while providing him with an army and independent authority that could theoretically be turned against you. Essex's Irish campaign begins with great fanfare, but quickly deteriorates into costly failure. His army of 16,000 men, the largest English force ever sent to Ireland, proves inadequate for the kind of warfare that Irish rebels wage. Tyrone's forces avoid pitched battles while launching constant raids that wear down English morale and resources. Essex's attempts at negotiation with Tyrone are seen in England as evidence of weakness or even treasonous collaboration. More fatally, Essex's behaviour in Ireland demonstrates the kind of political incompetence that makes effective rule impossible. He knights dozens of his followers without royal authorization, creates new peers in violation of his instructions, and worst of all, negotiates a truce with Tyrone that includes terms he has no authority to grant. When you send letters criticizing his performance, he responds with complaints about insufficient support and dark hints about enemies at court who are undermining his efforts. The final crisis comes when Essex abandons his Irish command without permission and returns to England in September 1599, bursting into your private apartments at Nonsuch Palace while you're still in your bedgown, without makeup and unprepared for public appearance. It's a violation of court protocol so serious that it amounts to a form of assault on your royal dignity, and your initial shock quickly turns to cold fury. Essex's supporters later claim that he expected to find you surrounded by evil counsellors who had turned you against him, and that seeing you alone would allow him to restore your confidence in his loyalty. But the episode reveals his fundamental misunderstanding of your character and position. You're not a woman who can be manipulated by masculine charm or intimidated by dramatic gestures. You're a queen whose authority depends on maintaining the ceremonial dignity that Essex has just violated. Your response to Essex's insubordination combines personal hurt with political calculation. You place him under house arrest, strip him of his offices, and make clear that his return to favour will require genuine submission rather than theatrical apologies. But you also avoid the immediate execution that Essex's behaviour arguably warrants, hoping that isolation and reflection might restore his reason and loyalty. Instead, Essex's house arrest only increases his desperation and radicalises his followers. Convinced that you're controlled by his enemies and that only dramatic action can restore his position, he begins planning what amounts to a coup d'etat. The conspiracy that develops around Essex House in early 1601 includes some of England's most prominent young nobles, united by ambition, debt, and the belief that your ageing government needs masculine rejuvenation. The Essex Rebellion of the 8th of February 1601 proves to be a pathetic anticlimax to years of growing tension. Essex and roughly 200 followers march through London expecting popular support that never materialises. Londoners, prosperous and secure under your rule, have no interest in overthrowing a government that has brought them peace and prosperity. The rebellion collapses within hours, and Essex finds himself barricaded in his own house, surrounded by royal forces and abandoned by all but his most fanatical supporters. Your response to Essex's rebellion demonstrates the steel that has always underlain your diplomatic flexibility. Essex is tried for treason by his peers and condemned to death, despite his attempts to blame his actions on temporary madness and evil counsellors. When he's executed on the 25th of February 1601, you show no mercy and express no regret. The man who violated your trust and threatened your government has received the justice that treason demands. The Essex crisis marks the end of your reign's romantic phase and the beginning of its twilight period. You're now 67 years old, ruling a kingdom that has achieved greatness but faces new challenges that your aging body and mind must somehow address. The generation that created Elizabethan England is passing away, and the question of what will replace it becomes increasingly urgent as your own mortality becomes impossible to ignore. The new century finds you changed in ways that go deeper than the wrinkles and grey hair that cosmetics can no longer entirely conceal. At 68, you remain intellectually sharp and politically astute, but the Essex Rebellion has left scars that affect both your judgment and your emotional equilibrium. The court that once sparkled with youthful energy now carries an undertone of melancholy, as if everyone understands that an era is drawing to its close. Your appearance has become a carefully maintained illusion that requires increasing effort to sustain. The red wigs grow more elaborate as your natural hair thins. The white lead cosmetics thicken to hide age spots and wrinkles, and your clothing becomes more magnificent to compensate for the body it conceals. Foreign ambassadors report that you sometimes appear more like a painted statue than a living woman, but they also note that your voice remains strong and your presence still commands attention. The court itself reflects your aging in subtle but significant ways. The younger generation of courtiers treats you with reverence that borders on worship, but it's the reverence due to a monument rather than the affectionate loyalty you once inspired. They compete for your favour with the same intensity as their predecessors, but they also position themselves for the reign that must inevitably follow yours, creating undercurrents of anticipation that you pretend not to notice. Yet this twilight period also witnesses the culmination of your reign's cultural achievements. William Shakespeare, now the leading dramatist of his generation, writes the great tragedies that will define English literature for centuries. Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth all explore themes of power, aging, and mortality that seem to reflect your own situation. When Hamlet speaks of the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, audiences hear echoes of their aging queen's approaching journey. Your court's patronage of the arts reaches new heights of sophistication as you consciously work to establish a cultural legacy that will outlive your physical presence. Ben Jonson writes masques that celebrate English achievements while acknowledging the transience of earthly glory. Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen, finally completed, presents you as Gloriana in epic verse that transforms contemporary politics into timeless allegory. The Elizabethan age is becoming conscious of itself as a historical period worthy of commemoration. The war with Spain finally ends in 1604, shortly after your death, but the peace negotiations begin during your final years and reflect the transformed international situation your reign has created. Spain, exhausted by decades of global warfare no longer poses an existential threat to English independence. Instead, both kingdoms face the new challenge of Dutch commercial competition and emerging threats from France and the Ottoman Empire. The bipolar world of Catholic Spain versus Protestant England is giving way to a more complex European balance that will define the 17th century. Your domestic policies during these final years show the careful consolidation of a lifetime's experience in governance. The religious settlement you established in 1559 has become so thoroughly accepted that even Catholic subjects generally accept your authority while maintaining their private beliefs. The economic policies that encouraged trade and exploration have created a merchant class wealthy enough to support both government and cultural activities without the crushing taxation that burdens other European monarchies. But the succession question, avoided for so long through diplomatic skill and political necessity, can no longer be postponed. James VI of Scotland, son of the Mary Stuart you executed 16 years earlier, has emerged as the inevitable heir to your throne. Your private communications with James are masterpieces of diplomatic preparation, establishing his legitimacy as your successor, while avoiding any formal commitment that might undermine your own authority or create rival centres of power. Parliament addresses the succession question with unusual directness during your final years, but your responses maintain the ambiguity that has characterised your entire approach to dynastic issues. "I am your anointed queen," you tell them in 1601. "I will never be by violence constrained to do anything. I thank God I am endued with such qualities that if I were turned out of the realm in my petticoat, I were able to live in any place in Christendom." It's both a promise and a warning. You'll provide for England's future, but only on your own terms and in your own time. Your final progress through England in the summer of 1602 becomes a triumph that rivals your coronation procession 43 years earlier. The crowds that gather to see their aging queen demonstrate the deep affection that your long reign has earned. These aren't the calculated displays of loyalty that marked your early progresses, but genuine expressions of gratitude from subjects who understand they're witnessing the end of an extraordinary reign. The progress also serves as a final tour of the England you've helped create. The prosperity visible in rebuilt churches, expanded manor houses, and thriving market towns testifies to 4 decades of peace and good governance. The literature, music, and art that flourish in provincial centres, as well as London, demonstrate the cultural confidence that your patronage has fostered. Most importantly, the religious harmony visible in communities where Catholics and Protestants coexist peacefully validates the tolerant policies you've pursued, despite pressure from extremists on both sides. Your final Christmas court at Whitehall in 1602 becomes a conscious farewell to the world you've known. The familiar faces around you are mostly those of children and grandchildren of your original courtiers. The Cecils, the Howards, the Careys, families whose fortunes have been intertwined with yours for 2 generations. The ceremonies and entertainments follow patterns established decades earlier, but everyone understands they're participating in the last great celebration of the Elizabethan age. The masks performed during this final Christmas season explicitly address themes of mortality and legacy. Ben Jonson's satire of the old age presents allegorical figures representing the passing of time, the transience of earthly glory, and the immortality achieved through great deeds. When you watch these performances, you're seeing your own life transformed into art, your reign mythologized even before it ends. Your health begins to fail noticeably in early 1603, though you struggle to maintain public appearances and continue conducting government business. The iron will that has sustained you through 5 decades of political crises refuses to acknowledge physical weakness, But your closest advisors notice increasing frailty and occasional confusion that suggests your extraordinary mental faculties are finally succumbing to age. The final act of your reign approaches with the same mixture of drama and calculation that has characterized your entire career. You understand that your death will mark the end not just of your personal rule, but of an entire historical epoch. The England that James VI of Scotland will inherit bears little resemblance to the divided, impoverished kingdom you inherited from Mary Tudor in 1558. Your life's work has been the transformation of England from a European backwater into a confident nation ready to dominate the coming century. As winter turns to spring in 1603, you prepare for the greatest transition of all, the passage from life to legend, from queen to historical monument, from Elizabeth Tudor to Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, whose reign will forever symbolize England's emergence as a great power and the flowering of English culture that bears your name. March 1603 finds you at Richmond Palace, the smallest and most intimate of your residences, as if you've consciously chosen to end your reign where it began, in relative simplicity, surrounded by a handful of trusted servants, rather than the elaborate court ceremonial that has defined your public life for 45 years. The Thames flows past your windows, just as it did when you were a child at Greenwich, but everything else has changed beyond recognition. Your physical decline has accelerated dramatically since Christmas, though you fight against it with the same determination you once showed against Spanish invasion. You refuse to take to your bed, insisting on maintaining a semblance of normal routine, even as walking becomes difficult and eating becomes painful. Your ladies-in-waiting watch you with growing concern, but they know better than to suggest openly that you should prepare for death. Elizabeth Tudor has never accepted limitations imposed by others, and she won't start now. The succession question, avoided through 5 decades of diplomatic skill, finally demands resolution. Robert Cecil, son of your faithful William Cecil, and now your chief minister, approaches the subject with careful indirection. James VI of Scotland has been preparing for this moment for years, but the actual transfer of power requires your explicit acknowledgement that he will inherit your throne. It's the last great political decision of your reign, and perhaps the most important. Your response to Cecil demonstrates that your political instincts remain sharp even as your body fails. You won't name James explicitly heir. That would create a rival centre of power while you still live, but your hints are clear enough to ensure a smooth transition. I will that a king succeed me, you tell Cecil. And who should that be but our cousin of Scotland? It's vintage Elizabeth, a commitment that sounds definitive while remaining technically ambiguous. The court at Richmond takes on an otherworldly quality during these final weeks. Courtiers speak in whispers, servants move through corridors with unusual quiet, and everyone participates in the elaborate pretense that their queen is merely temporarily indisposed rather than dying. You maintain this fiction yourself, continuing to receive foreign ambassadors and sign state papers even when the effort clearly exhausts you. Your final public appearance comes in early March, when you insist on receiving a delegation from Parliament who have come to discuss financial matters. Dressed in your most magnificent robes and supported by 2 ladies-in-waiting, you maintain royal dignity for nearly an hour before retiring to your private apartments. Those who witness this final performance report that your voice remains strong and your manner authoritative, even as your physical frailty was obvious to everyone present. The religious question that has dominated your reign appears in your final days as various clergy attempt to minister to your spiritual needs. You remain Protestant to the end, but your approach to faith retains the same practical flexibility that characterized your political policies. When the Archbishop of Canterbury offers prayers for your soul, you participate with apparent devotion, but you also ensure that Catholic courtiers understand they won't face persecution under your successor. Your death vigil begins in earnest on the 20th of March, when you finally take to your bed and acknowledge that your strength is failing. But even now, you resist the conventional expectations of royal deathbed scenes. You refuse extreme unction from Catholic priests, but you also avoid the kind of Protestant theological declarations that might alienate moderate subjects. Your approach to death mirrors your approach to life, pragmatic, dignified, and stubbornly independent. The historical records of your final days reflect the mixture of genuine grief and political calculation that characterizes all royal deaths. Your courtiers are genuinely sorrowful at losing a queen who has provided stability and prosperity for nearly half a century. But they're also positioning themselves for the new reign, sending messages to James in Scotland and ensuring that the transition will serve their own interests as well as England's needs. On the 24th of March 1603, at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, you die peacefully in your sleep at Richmond Palace. Your last coherent words, according to witnesses, express confidence in James's succession and hope that England will continue to prosper under his rule. The Virgin Queen, who spent her life married to England, finally surrenders her earthly crown for whatever immortality awaits those who transform nations and define historical epochs. Your death triggers the most complex succession in English history since the Norman conquest. Within hours, proclamations declaring James VI of Scotland to be James I of England are read in London and major provincial centres. The transition occurs with remarkable smoothness, testimony to the careful preparations you've made and the stability you've created during your long reign. But your death also marks the end of the Tudor dynasty that has ruled England for 118 years, from Henry VII's victory at Bosworth Field to your final breath at Richmond. The family that brought England through the Reformation, the break with Rome, and the emergence as a European power passes into history, leaving behind institutions and traditions that will shape English development for centuries to come. The immediate reaction to your death combines genuine mourning with relief that the succession has proceeded smoothly. Church bells toll throughout England, but they ring changes of celebration as well as sorrow, celebrating your achievements while welcoming your successor. It's exactly the kind of balanced response you would have orchestrated yourself if you could have managed your own funeral arrangements. Your funeral, held at Westminster Abbey on the 28th of April 1603, becomes the most magnificent royal ceremony in English history to that point. The procession from Whitehall to the Abbey includes representatives of every aspect of English society you've influenced: nobles and commoners, Protestants and Catholics, scholars and merchants, soldiers and sailors, poets and musicians. The hearse, bearing your coffin, is surmounted by a lifelike effigy wearing your royal robes and crown, allowing your subjects one final glimpse of their beloved Queen. The funeral sermon, delivered by John Whitgift, Archbishop of Canterbury, captures the magnitude of what England has lost and gained during your reign. She was a queen, such as the world never saw before, and such as the world will never see again. But Whitgift also emphasises continuity. The institutions you've built, the religious settlement you've established, and the national confidence you've fostered will outlive your physical presence. Your tomb in Westminster Abbey, which you'll share with your half-sister Mary Tudor in a final gesture of family reconciliation, bears an inscription that summarises your achievement. Partners both in throne and grave, here rest we two sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in the hope of one resurrection. But history will remember you, not primarily as Mary's sister, but as Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, whose reign transformed England from a divided kingdom into a unified nation ready to dominate the world stage. The England that James I inherits in 1603 bears no resemblance to the precarious kingdom you inherited from Mary Tudor in 1558, where once you ruled a small, poor, religiously divided nation threatened by foreign powers. James inherits a wealthy, confident, culturally sophisticated kingdom that has proven its ability to defeat the greatest empires in the world. Your life's work has been the creation of modern England, and your death marks not the end of that achievement, but its transition from personal rule to institutional permanence. Your death on that cold March morning in 1603 should have marked the end of your story, but instead it begins your transformation from mortal queen into immortal legend. Within days of your funeral, the process of mythologization begins as poets, historians, and ordinary subjects start creating the version of Elizabeth I that will captivate imaginations for centuries to come. The woman becomes the symbol, the queen becomes the archetype, and Elizabeth Tudor evolves into Gloriana, the eternal virgin queen, whose reign represents England at its most glorious and confident. The immediate aftermath of your death reveals the magnitude of what you've accomplished. James I's accession proceeds with unprecedented smoothness, demonstrating the institutional stability you've created during 45 years of careful governance. The religious settlement you established in 1559 proves so durable that even a Scottish Presbyterian king accepts it without major modifications. The commercial and naval policies you've fostered have created an England wealthy enough to support royal government without the crushing taxation that burdens other European monarchies. But perhaps most importantly, you've created something entirely new in European experience, a sense of English national identity that transcends regional, religious, and class divisions. The England of 1603 isn't just a collection of territories ruled by the same monarch, but a nation whose people share common values, common culture, and common confidence in their destiny. This transformation, more than any military victory or diplomatic triumph, represents your greatest achievement. The cultural flowering of your reign continues after your death, as if the artists you patronized need time to fully express what they learned under your rule. Shakespeare writes his late masterpieces, The Tempest, The Winter's Tale, Cymbeline, plays that seem to reflect on themes of forgiveness, reconciliation, and renewal that mirror England's own transformation under your guidance. When Prospero breaks his staff and drowns his book in the tempest, audiences hear echoes of your own final surrender of earthly power. The historical assessments begin almost immediately, and they establish patterns that will persist for centuries. Protestant historians celebrate you as the defender of religious truth against Catholic tyranny, emphasizing your role in defeating the Spanish Armada and protecting English liberties. Catholic historians, while critical of your religious policies, often acknowledge your political skill and the relative moderation of your persecution compared to continental standards. But the most significant development in your posthumous reputation is the gradual recognition that your reign represents something unprecedented in European history: the successful rule of an unmarried female monarch who maintained her independence, while creating one of the continent's most successful kingdoms. You've proven that women can exercise political authority as effectively as men, and that marriage isn't essential for royal legitimacy or governmental stability. This recognition develops slowly and unevenly. 17th century writers often attribute your success to exceptional personal qualities rather than female capability in general. But the precedent you've established makes future female rule more acceptable and queens, like Anne of Great Britain and Maria Theresa of Austria, will benefit from the path you've blazed through the wilderness of male-dominated politics. The literary tradition that emerges around your memory transforms you into various symbolic figures, depending on contemporary needs and anxieties. During the English Civil War of the 1642, both royalists and parliamentarians claim your legacy. Royalists emphasizing your defense of royal prerogative, parliamentarians stressing your cooperation with Parliament and resistance to Spanish tyranny. The Virgin Queen becomes whatever political faction needs her to be. The Restoration period of the late 17th century sees a romanticization of your reign that emphasizes cultural achievement over political struggle. John Dryden and other poets present the Elizabethan age as a golden time when England combined classical learning, Christian virtue, and national greatness in perfect harmony. This idealized version of your reign provides a nostalgic alternative to the religious and political conflicts that continue to plague Stuart England. The 18th century witnesses your transformation into a symbol of English liberty and Protestant virtue in opposition to French absolutism and Catholic superstition. Writers like David Hume present your reign as the foundation of England's constitutional government and commercial prosperity. The Virgin Queen becomes the mother of English freedom, the monarch who proved that royal authority and popular liberty could coexist. But perhaps the most significant development in your historical reputation comes with the growth of the British Empire in the 18th and 19th centuries. As English influence spreads across the globe, your reign is increasingly seen as the moment when England first claimed its destiny as a world power. The defeat of the Spanish Armada becomes the founding myth of British naval supremacy, while your encouragement of exploration and trade is presented as the beginning of Britain's global commercial empire. Victorian Britain, ruled by another long-reigning queen, finds particular inspiration in your example. Queen Victoria herself sometimes styles her reign as a second Elizabethan age, emphasizing the parallels between two strong female monarchs who presided over periods of unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement. The comparison isn't entirely accurate. Victoria's constitutional monarchy bears little resemblance to your personal rule, but it demonstrates your continuing power as a symbol of successful female leadership. The 20th century brings new perspectives on your reign, informed by modern understanding of gender, politics, and social change. Feminist historians celebrate your career as proof that women can exercise power as effectively as men, while also acknowledging the unique circumstances that made your success possible. Social historians examine the lives of ordinary subjects during your reign, revealing both the benefits and the costs of your policies for different segments of English society. Modern scholarship has also revised understanding of your personal character and motivations. Where earlier historians often presented you as either a saint or a villain, depending on their religious and political perspectives, contemporary analysis recognizes your complexity, your genuine religious convictions, combined with political pragmatism, your desire for personal affection, balanced against the requirements of royal authority, your commitment to English welfare, tempered by the ruthless actions that effective rule sometimes demanded. But through all these changing interpretations, certain aspects of your historical significance remain constant. You transformed England from a minor European kingdom into a major power, established religious and political institutions that proved remarkably durable, and presided over cultural achievements that continue to influence world literature and art. Most importantly, you demonstrated that effective rule depends more on intelligence, determination, and political skill than on gender, martial prowess, or dynastic inheritance. Your reign established England as a player on the world stage, at the crucial moment when European exploration and colonization were reshaping global relationships. The confidence and commercial networks you fostered made possible England's later dominance of international trade and colonial expansion. Without the foundation you laid, the British Empire that dominated the 18th and 19th centuries would have been inconceivable. The England you left to James I in 1603 possessed all the elements necessary for global greatness: naval supremacy, commercial expertise, religious and political stability, cultural sophistication, and most importantly, national confidence in its destiny and capabilities. Your 45-year reign had transformed not just English government and society, but English national consciousness itself. Today, more than 4 centuries after your death, you remain one of history's most recognizable and admired rulers. Your image appears on currency, in popular culture, and in academic studies that continue to explore different aspects of your achievement. The Virgin Queen has become truly immortal, not because of anything supernatural, but because you created institutions, traditions, and national characteristics that continue to influence the world long after your mortal body returned to dust. Your legacy lives on in the English language itself, which achieved its modern form during your reign through the works of Shakespeare, Marlowe, and other writers you patronized. Every time someone quotes "to be" or "not to be" or "all the world's a stage," they're connecting with the cultural flowering you made possible. The King James Bible, commissioned shortly after your death, but building on the English Protestant tradition you established, has shaped religious and literary expression throughout the English-speaking world. The constitutional traditions you helped establish, of balance between royal prerogative and parliamentary authority, the principle of religious toleration within national unity, the idea that effective government requires popular consent, became the foundation not just of modern Britain, but of democratic government worldwide. The American colonists who declared independence in 1776 often invoked your example as a monarch who ruled with her subjects' welfare in mind, rather than through arbitrary power. Your model of female leadership continues to inspire women seeking political authority in cultures where such ambitions face traditional resistance. From Catherine the Great of Russia to Margaret Thatcher of Britain, female rulers have consciously or unconsciously followed patterns you established, using intelligence and determination to overcome gender-based skepticism, building coalitions that transcend traditional political divisions, and demonstrating that effective leadership depends on competence rather than conventional masculine authority. The England you created, confident, commercially successful, culturally sophisticated, and internationally influential, became the template that other nations sought to emulate. The Dutch Republic, the emerging American colonies, and eventually modern democratic states around the world have drawn inspiration from the Elizabethan model of combining strong government with individual liberty, religious diversity within national unity, and cultural achievement alongside commercial prosperity. But perhaps your most enduring legacy is the proof you provided that individual leadership can genuinely transform historical development. You inherited a small, divided, impoverished kingdom, threatened by more powerful neighbours and torn apart by religious conflict. Through 45 years of intelligent, determined, and flexible rule, you created a nation that became one of history's most successful and influential powers. The transformation you accomplished wasn't inevitable or automatic. It resulted from thousands of individual decisions, each made with careful attention to England's long-term interests rather than short-term advantage. Your willingness to remain unmarried, to moderate religious conflict rather than pursue theological purity, to encourage commercial development over military expansion, and to invest in cultural achievement alongside political stability, created the unique combination of factors that made England's golden age possible. Your reign demonstrates that history isn't just the product of vast impersonal forces, economic trends, demographic changes, technological developments, but also of individual choices made by people with the intelligence and determination to shape their circumstances rather than merely react to them. Elizabeth Tudor, the bastard princess who became Gloriana, proves that exceptional individuals can indeed change the world. The woman who once said, "I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king," has become an eternal symbol of the transformative power of courage, intelligence, and unwavering dedication to duty. Your life story continues to inspire not just historians and political leaders, but anyone who faces seemingly impossible challenges and wonders whether individual effort can make a meaningful difference. In the end, your greatest achievement was not any single victory or policy, but the demonstration that with sufficient intelligence, determination, and skill, one person can indeed transform a nation and influence the course of world history. The Virgin Queen who ruled England for 45 years died more than 4 centuries ago, but Gloriana lives on wherever people believe in the power of exceptional individuals to create a better world. Thank you for joining me on this remarkable journey through the life of Queen Elizabeth I and the golden age that bears her name. From her uncertain childhood as a bastardized princess to her final transformation into the immortal Gloriana, Elizabeth's story reminds us that history's greatest achievements often come from the most unlikely sources. We've witnessed how a woman who should have been powerless, illegitimate, female, ruling in an age of masculine authority, instead became one of history's most successful monarchs. Through intelligence, determination, and political genius, she transformed England from a divided kingdom into a confident nation ready to dominate the world stage. Her legacy lives on not just in the institutions she created or the cultural flowering she fostered, but in the eternal proof that exceptional individuals can indeed change the world. The Virgin Queen shows us that with courage, wisdom, and unwavering dedication to something greater than ourselves, we too can leave our mark on history. Thank you for listening to this epic tale of Elizabeth Tudor's transformation from princess to legend. If you enjoyed this journey through the Elizabethan age, please like and subscribe for more stories that bring history's greatest figures to life. The past has so much to teach us about courage, leadership, and the power of human determination, and there are so many more incredible stories waiting to be told. Until next time, remember that you too carry within you the potential to transform your world, just as Elizabeth transformed hers. The question isn't whether you can make a difference, it's whether you have the courage to try.